I think this panel is a little shorter,
Nice to meet you.
so I'm just going to get jumping in here. I'm honored to introduce the members of A Conversation with Oscar-celebrated women directors. I'm Brendan Birch. I run the animation studio 6 Point Harness, and I also run Mondo Media. I'm on the board of Women in Animation. I serve as treasurer and the person who runs the student committee, and it's been just one of the greatest experiences ever. All these women are Oscar celebrated, including your moderator, Bonnie Arnold. I was given fun facts about each of them, so I'm going to do my best here. Bonnie's from DreamWorks Animation. Bonnie's fun fact is that when she was 7 years old, her mom took her to a Beatles concert at Atlanta Stadium, and 40 years later when she met Paul McCartney, she told him the story and he looked at her and said very sweetly, "I remember you." Nora Toomey, all right. Nora was also 7 years old when she was taught by her father how to drive a tractor, but he never taught her how to change gears so that he'd be able to run alongside the tractor and jump in case anything got out of hand. And we have Dorota Kobiela. I think her fun fact is one that you're going to want to ask her about after the panel because she was swapped for a communist car when she was 5 years old. And lastly, we have Vicki Jensen. I saved her for last because it says she learned how to make a sound like a cricket when she was young, and she still can. Is there any way we can hear this? All right, it's impressive. All right, everybody, enjoy the panel. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to try to keep this to 45 minutes, which isn't very long. We're going to hop in here. And I just want to say you can save your questions for our cocktail hour. That'll be at the end of today's session. So anyway, it's great to be here. Thank you, Women in Animation. Thank you to everyone for having us. I wanted to start by talking about, obviously, I'm excited to be with these three women. All have been part of Oscar-nominated animated films, kind of the highest level of recognition in feature animation. But talk a little bit about what led you, sort of your path to becoming a director, and maybe in particular a little bit about the particular film that you were celebrated for. In Nora's instance, it was a breadwinner, Dorota for Loving Vincent, and Vicki for Shark Tale. But Nora, do you want to talk a little bit first?
Yeah, I didn't consciously enter into animation, not a mind directing. You know, I wanted to draw, and then I figured out through going to art college that you know, animation was the one way that you could draw every day for a living. So that's how I got there. And the Irish Film Board had they still do have an initiative for short films every year. Very low budget, but it was the chance to put forward an idea, and I did that with a little short based on an Inuit folktale, and that's how I found myself directing. It wasn't really a conscious decision. It was just I followed a story that I loved, and the film board got involved, and it was through that. I mean, we set up our own company, Cartoon Saloon, back in 1999, but again, it wasn't with the idea of me particularly directing that I was involved with that. It was more that I just loved being part of a team. You know.
And storytelling played into that?
Absolutely. I still think of animation as, I remember my brother at one point saying, you know, looking at me when I was about 10 or something like that, and he said, you know, you're too old to play with dolls, because I was there with my dolls, and I was kind of hiding them, but I realized I'm still playing with dolls. They're just actors now, you know, and I love it. It's the same space. It's the same imaginative, playful, joyful, creative space, you know. No matter, I'm still too old for it. But.
Right. Dorota, how about yourself in terms of becoming a director?
The directing opportunity, I think I made it for myself happen because I really wanted to. I wanted to make a short film, and I'm coming from fine arts background, and I guess. On some point, I consciously decided that I need a different medium to express myself more by storytelling rather than by just visual arts. And and I think at the end of that kind of longer story part of my life, but at the end of that part, I decided I'll try to make that that opportunity for myself. And I started working on short film. I found myself a producer and applied to the Polish Film Institute. And then it became a feature film, but that's another kind of long story.
Were you a animator or what was your?
Well, I started off as art design, concept art, then texturing, and then I went more into different aspects of animation. And the funny thing is, in Poland, when we were working on short films, the concept, I don't know, maybe it's not only a Polish thing, but the concept was the director is also a kind of like a Renaissance man who does everything. Like, so these guys were doing their own sound very often, or even composing, but definitely all the aspects of animation, producing the animation. So I get to go through a lot of jobs, and getting them.
Director was your favorite job?
Directing was my dream. I was thinking that is the best job ever if you get to see it in a cinema, because that's the best thing you can do. For me, that was.
Yeah. And I just want to go back to Nora for one second. Nora, you were an animator? Were you an animator?
I started out as an animator, yeah.
And Vicky, you were a story artist? Or you were
No,
art director?
I started as a production designer, art director, and it wasn't until I started storyboarding on He-Man that I got excited about storytelling. So I came to directing pretty late in my career, and that's why I came to DreamWorks, was to direct. So I'd applied to AFI's program for a women's directing program where they were looking for diversity in the other form of its definition, that they wanted people for the program from diverse fields. So coming from animation, I thought, well, that's different. But I got turned down, and DreamWorks was my plan B.
Was, I know there's, it's probably longer than we have time for today, a long story about the evolution of Shrek, which was, the first movie to actually win Academy Award for Best Animated Feature. That was the first year they had the category. But in terms of your coming to that movie, what was that?
At the time that I came to that movie, it was the Siberia of DreamWorks. It was, no one went there voluntarily. So I was sort of sent there after finishing up as one of the production designers on El Dorado. And it was a sort of a confluence of problems. The story was stuck. The lead, Chris Farley, who was originally going to be Shrek, passed away. And one of the directors wanted off to go work on Spirit. So, and the fourth element being I'm a loudmouth, which I told my table at lunch. But I joined the story team to help reshape the movie. And there were a lot of friends on there from the old Ren and Stimpy days. And they had done work that I just thought was amazing, that conflicted with the rest of the movie. And I was very opinionated about it. And that, I think, really directly led to directing.
Well, I guess if you heard the last panel, you have to be a loudmouth so you don't get constantly interrupted by your peers, right?
I grew up with a lot of brothers and sisters. Our family is so loud that at the dinner table I learned that when they take a breath, I talk.
Yeah.
Talk really fast.
Right. I was talking to Nora right before this panel, and I know we've heard a lot of us who've been around this morning have heard some conversation about how to sort of lean into getting more women employed and hiring more women in various jobs. But I think another important piece that I think it's especially for the women directors to touch on a little bit is about stories about women and about girl characters on the screen, because I think it's equally important for the younger generations to see how women are portrayed. And I think for each of these women's films, for The Breadwinner and for Loving Vincent had the daughter was basically the storyteller. In Shrek, Shrek wasn't the male was the lead, but there was also the character Fiona. So I mean, in just to talk for a minute about how these how important female characters are in terms of the storytelling, and how you guys, you women as directors and as just storytellers, made those characters kind of come to life.
I think for me, when I read Deborah Ellis's book, The Breadwinner, in which the film is based, I didn't really think of Parvana, the main character, as being female or male, or I just looked at her as this absolutely burning, courageous, incredible, flawed, funny character, and for me that was the way. And all of these panels are wonderful and interesting, but in ways I wonder, am I being put into a box? This box for women, and so I don't get to talk about. I get to talk about being a woman in the industry, or more than I do get to talk, I think, about the film or the subject matter of the film, which is interesting as a director. I know I have to, and I know that if my nieces want to direct films in 20 years' time, and for it not to be an issue at all, I have to do it now. I have to state it, even though it's not in my nature. It's not something I'm good at. It's not something that I have a burning ambition to do, but I have to. But I do think that putting female characters on the screen, not just Parvana, but I thought her mother was very interesting. I thought her older sister was very interesting, and they all had different worldviews, But I looked at the feminine in the male characters as well. There's a character in this film, Razak, who is, he's a member of the Taliban. He's quite conflicted, but there is there's a femininity to him, and I mean that in the sense that there's a warmth and there's he has a loving nature. He's a deep thinker, So it wasn't even specifically Parvana as a female character. I was looking for the feminine in her father as well, So in across the board in all of the characters. I even looked at the nurturing, responses in some of the characters that you would consider, the darker characters in the film. So it's big and it's complex,
Is that what drew you to the story, you think?
Absolutely, yeah. And I knew I didn't have answers. I still don't really have answers. I have more questions, And I think that's the sign of a good experience as a director. If you leave a project knowing that you've barely scratched the surface, but you have scratched something, and that there's something that touched you in that, I think, that's always a good thing.
How about you, Dorota, in terms of the Loving Vincent story? Where did that come from, and how did...
Well, for me, it's film is focused on Vincent and his character, and I always was amazed by him. He's such a pure soul, such a pure artist, and I was really respected him, and I was always very impressed by him, even though he's a very tragical character as well, but also have this tenacity and this. So for me, he was just this expression of pure artistic soul that, and I found...
you identified with him?
I wouldn't ever dare to compare in any sense, but he, absolutely, he was my hero. It was, we got reduced to certain roles as women, therefore, even though the art is part of very first historical art was very much women and female and male created, but on some point we, unfortunately, the path led us the way that, now it's really hard for me to find these heroes, in female artists, especially in that period of time. So therefore, it was Vincent always, and Vincent in his letters, but the way he expressed himself, I felt that is very pure in terms of there's no really diversity here. He was very much focused on showing how much he loves world and everything around him, through his painting and through his art. So I wanted to do the same, and that's why this character for me was so close. But I found really interesting to look for the female characters in this story, because basically I felt that what is the core of the story is that people see him from different, in different way, and there is a housekeeper's daughter who she kind of gets this ownership over him. She feels like she's entitled to know everything about him, and then there is Marguerite Gachet, the doctor's daughter, and she's sort of reduced to the role of playing
Good idea.
piano and understanding art and
Girl things.
yeah, the girl things, but you know, the way. So I. But for me, one of the very strong characters that we created completely was Louise Chevalier, the housekeeper, because she's very much a mother and not housekeeper in the sense she is also the keeper of that family and make sure that this eccentric doctor and his eccentric daughter and everyone and this intruder Vincent doesn't spoil their their home and their family. So I thought that every single character is very different and they bring their own femininity into the story.
Vicky?
I think, well, we were really proud of what we did with Princess Fiona as far as changing the narrative and the definition of a princess and what she's after. But I think we only went so far. You know, the thing we commented on is she was a young woman trapped by the expectations that had been put upon her and who she should be, but she still required rescuing. And you know, it's only so far we went, and that's really when we were all excited, you know, by going that far.
But a lot of young girls definitely aspired to be like
Yeah.
her. And
Right, and the princess character I'm working on now doesn't require anyone else to rescue her.
well,
And
that's the
with-
change over, 15 plus years, right?
Yeah, yeah, and
Hopefully.
yeah, but it's a you know, I'm more interested in the you know the condition of being human and what it means to achieve a human truth. And I think it takes all kinds of humans to do that. And so finally, for me, I'm working on a film where the girl is just a human and not a girl protagonist.
What were some of the, you know, you all are working sort of in different countries with different crews and that types of things. Is there, you know, particular challenges of being the boss of, you know, an animation crew, particularly as we've talked about, it's, you know, largely a man's world. It's changing quite a bit, but just in general, what are the challenges, I think, of being the director? And I think we had all talked a little bit ahead of this, you know, sort of, you know, being the boss and sort of, you know, maybe as a part of this, who do you depend on to sort of be your truth teller in this process? Who tells you when, you know, it's not going well, or maybe there's something you need to rethink? Who do you depend on for those kind of things when the movie's coming together?
Yeah, in terms of challenges, well, we had lots of challenges, of course, on the film, but I think, you know, I waited, what was I, 44, I suppose, when I took on this role. I wonder if I was 34 when I decided I was ready to solo direct a film. I probably would have come up against a lot more challenges. I was over ready. You know, you know, like I said, we set up the company in '99, and one third of the partnership there. So there was never a question of my authority or anything like that, you know. But I did realize, though, that a huge revelation on this film was the more ownership you give to each and every member of your team on the work that they do, and the more that you guide them to find the correct character arc, but using their skills for that, the more it gets put up on screen, the more wonderful it is. The more you communicate, the more you open everything up, the more you make sure that you stand behind everybody at least once a day, you know, kind of thing. Look over their shoulders, Skype them if you don't see them. Make sure that you have all the methods of communication open all the time. It puts more on the screen. The more you admit, the more mistakes you admit to, the more you know, failures and all of this, the more that people band together, that you can literally hear the exhale in a room when somebody says, "Oh, do you know what? I really messed up," and then it makes everything more human. Nobody's covering up. You know, the most dangerous thing in a production is when people start covering up mistakes, you know, or trying to hide them, you know. So the more you can just open up, the better it is. We had massive challenges on this film. Partly we couldn't time travel back to Kabul back, you know, in the late 90s, early 2000s, when 80% of the city had been destroyed, where cameras weren't allowed in. There was many issues on this film. But they all led to solutions, you know, and probably better ones than had we been able to go, and, you know, we wouldn't have picked up on some of the things. In terms of truth telling, my partnership with Tom and Paul in Cartoon Saloon is something that I'm, you know, we're friends. We always have been. you know, there have been difficult times, but they have my back, you know, and I have theirs. But in terms of being a director, for me it was, I would find time at the edit. Every week I would have to find at least half a day, if not a full day, to just sit there and imagine that I'm in the perfect spot in the audience and I've just walked in with my popcorn and I just watch the film as though I am that, you know, that it's fresh. And if I can't have that emotional response, that's the truth, you know, that's telling me that there's something off and I need to spend that week trying to pedal backwards.
The trust your gut
Yes,
of it all.
absolutely. Yeah.
Interesting. Do you find that the editor is one of your partners that you most rely on?
Absolutely, but I do spend, and it was the same with Song of the Sea and even the Secret of Kells, as head historian Song of the Sea, that I would find at least 6 months at the beginning of the project before the editor comes in, so that I know the film and I feel like I'm the one who knows the characters, and then that allows me give everybody freedom. So I'm not, you know, if I feel that I know the characters that well and know the story that well, then it allows me to give the freedom to the team that they need in order to own the work they do.
Challenges. Well, there's been so many challenges in this film, and for me, as also creative challenges as much as well as the just generally running the team. But I think I would start from the very beginning, because it's, if you're looking for the female director aspect challenge, I think that getting the role itself is challenging, because it was different for me when I was the artist that my friends or, you know, people hired, and all the directors I worked with, male directors, and it's great because it's lovely to have such a you know, sensitive female character as concept art, and it's different, and that person suddenly becomes a director, and you know, and that they wouldn't work for me at that point. So because the roles are changing, which is very sad, but maybe they'll change their mind one day. But anyway, so that's the first thing you do, and then all of a sudden I realized that I really have to prove myself all the time, which was also, you know, it's not enough that the whole project was super challenging to even like make it happen, to find the budget, the funding. Film took 6 years. We finished the financing the film the week before we ended production. So every month was just literally like figuring out whether we survive next month. And if it wasn't enough, then I would have to prove myself all the time, very often, especially on the set when I was directing live action part in Poland, because it's very hugely male-dominated environment, and you just have to be, prove that you are worth it to be, on that set and to be part of that club. So. A little bit complaining here, but so yeah, that was I think challenging. But in terms of creative challenges, for me the biggest was the writing that story, because it's got so many roles and obstacles. Like you were
a co-writer on it, I
yeah.
guess.
Well, I came up with the first idea and originated the idea, and I wrote the first version of the script, and then Hugh Welshman, my co-director, producer, and co-writer, and also my husband now is there. And he joined me, and we wrote together. But I think it was super challenging because you have the rules you have to follow, like Vincent's paintings, his lives and facts, and all of this creates kind of like a puzzle piece. It's not like flowing, creative flow, when you can like take you wherever it takes you, then you just follow. It was more complicated. So, and also the challenge is the biggest one is dealing with the most iconic artist that everyone knows and loves and respects, and all of a sudden you just take it and make it in the screen, and it's huge responsibility. And I felt the burden of that responsibility. I mean, burden. It's I enjoyed that, but on the other hand, I felt, one wrong move, and I do something very wrong, which I should have. It's always like, there was always
Right.
7 years of going back and forth. Am I doing something wrong here? Or
It's hard to keep up the stamina
Yeah.
after that long on one thing.
yeah.
I think
No,
that's
I
always
mean,
a
that's-
challenge in animation, actually. And how do you keep
I don't
excited about
know.
it every day?
It's because you know how the film's gonna look like. You know that at the stage of animatic and kind of, and then you're like, ugh.
How was it when you first saw some of those paintings actually come to life? I mean, it must have been
that
very
was the most
exciting.
beautiful moment. Like the first, especially the first animation transitions when we just didn't know what's gonna happen on the screen. We just like follow some, without any, previous, just with rough sketches. So that was really exciting. That was really incredible to see how the painting moves. The painting that because I'm a complete museum freak, and I would just like go around Europe and watch art all the time, and all of a sudden make it happen, and seeing it to come to life in front of your eyes is just very exciting.
Vicki, I'm going to throw one more thing in, and when we were talking about now, the challenges of sort of directing and stuff, but I know because I've worked there for many years, but at DreamWorks, everybody has an opinion. And how and it's in such a, just to add to it, in such a collaborative medium, and with so many people that are really good at what they do, how do you sort of balance, these good ideas coming at you with sort of your vision of what you're looking for, because there are good ideas that come and maybe, you could go this way or a little bit that way, or I'm just curious as to how that is as a director.
Yeah, it's the most collaborative form of filmmaking that there is. So it's kind of come up in the industry understanding how many voices everybody has, and so I was comfortable with that. In fact, that's what gave me my chance and my opportunity, was being able to give notes. I mean, who gives notes? I think Mariah was saying it, when coming from live action, people are surprised that it's like asking the gaffer for notes or something, but for us, it's really important. It is where you're reminded of the truth of the story. But the other aspect of it is something that you were touching on, Nora. I love your approach of involving people and letting them author the ideas and letting them take the credit for those ideas, because people will jump through fire if they understand, that they're part of the process, they're a valued member of the process. The other thing that I've learned to do is to talk about the meaning of the movie with everybody, so they know why we're making the movie. When I first started at DreamWorks, people used to say, trust the process, and the movie will tell you what it wants to be. And I was like, okay, well, all right, and I actually, that's how Shrek and Shark Tale kind of worked, and we got lucky that we stumbled onto what that movie really was about very, very early on when I came on. And now I lead with that. I lead with the meaning of the movie. That's how I find a way in. That's where I'm at right now, is that why are we making this movie? What are we trying to say? And then whenever you stray, when these great ideas come up, like, oh God, that's really entertaining, and I love those 2 new characters you decided to bring into your storyboard because you didn't like our pages, but you have to come back to what are we trying to say? How does this scene fit into the emotional journey of that character? Because that's what's pulling the audience through it, and that's why we're telling the story, is to get to that human truth, that unique human truth that we're trying to expose in this movie. So involving every member of the crew and talking to everybody about meaning, then they end up coming to you like, oh, you were talking about circles, and you were talking about how water might mean this, and so they bring you ideas. They get excited because they're part of it.
But I think it's probably a little challenging to try to stick with what the movie. I mean, you could get very derailed if you don't sort of stick to a certain thing at a certain point, I guess.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're the conductor of the orchestra, and you have to keep them into the theme. The horns get louder and the flutes get louder, but then, everybody has to work together ultimately. If it helps to put something up on the wall to remind you why the movie is there, it's like, okay, does this fit? Does this a marvelous, fun idea that somebody brought up, is it just cool, or is it actually supporting what the story is?
I love that you can say to a voice actor, the character is feeling isolated in this scene, and they do something with it, and you say that to an animator, the character is feeling isolated, and they're able to translate that into their skill set. You say it to a compositor, and they do something else with that same information. Lots of times you're just repeating the same thing over and over again, but to different teams, and they translate it into their own skill set. It's much better than saying, oh, I want it, dusty here, and yeah, exactly, because they get it. You're hitting them in the heart, and they can translate it.
I think one of the fun things I've experienced too is that sometimes that does happen, and sometimes it does change the course just a little bit, and then you have to go back and, can you change this performance a little bit because this was so good over here that we need to, now I want to really uncork some truth, some interesting a thing.
Yeah.
Well,
that
that's
you
why
didn't
we're so
expect.
lucky, to make the movie over and over and over again by screening the story reels, because, we're in a unique position to learn from it that, maybe that's where this moment has a better moment to shine, or better place in the movie to shine. So let's use this earlier moment to go.
And you also have to be open to, you might send your notes out to an amazing editor or something like that, and you get a certain set of notes or whatever, but you might be drying your hands in the bathroom, and an intern comes up to you and they've got the most amazing insight that you use, so it's just being open the entire time as well, and obviously it's trusting your own judgment and believing that you know the character and the story, but just having that openness as well, and seeing when you can judge, kind of thing, is an idea so brilliant that it's worth a delay or an overspend if you need to or whatever, yeah.
I'm just curious, did any of you have a mentor that you feel like in terms of directing, or something you aspired to do or be or work closely with?
Go ahead. Sorry, please.
I think I'll start because it's very pretty much straightforward. I had my mentor for myself when I was studying. That was my painting teacher, who taught me a lot of important things, but not only with painting, but about thinking and about developing yourself and about understanding things in art and in life. But then during loving Vincent, we were pretty much mentors for each other with Hugh, and it was, and I think it was really very exciting about the process of the fact that we were working together, because he had completely different approach and had things for him, important things for. He would pick completely different important things than I would, and we had to keep each other focused and also mentor each other in a way. So I think that was, that was a collaborative, and it was great because if you have someone who you trust the most, who you love, and that person is also your mentor, that is really wonderful.
Vicki, you were going to say something?
I feel like I've had a lot of mentors. I mean, the first being my mom, who just really raised all of us girls in the family to be, fierce and not to see any limitations. So I think that gave me some just equipment to move forward with. But I found, that I think about it, every department that I moved through, there was someone who was patient and willing to teach me, whether it was background painting. And initially, these were all men, and over the years that changed, but there just always seemed to be somebody who was, really gracious and generous with their knowledge. And it made it seem like that is part of what you should do. So I tried to do the same thing. I would give fun, background painting lessons to friends who had never picked up a brush before, at lunchtime at DreamWorks and things like that. But I think there have been a lot of mentors.
I think from a certain generation, a lot of us women, if you didn't have men that were helping you out in some way, then you wouldn't have moved forward. I mean, especially if you started, being a PA or, any of those kind of things, you had to depend on them. There were a lot of good ones, so.
Or, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it wasn't one particular person. I just all the way through, you know, from, you know, a teacher saying, wow, that drawing is really nice, you know, to getting my first internship at Disney, you know, to my first job in Brown Bag, you know, and on through just people, you know, saying the right thing at the right time. Lots of times just giving that extra little bit of encouragement. And it's amazing what a little bit of encouragement can do and how you can hang on to it, sometimes for years, you know. And I've had... you know, students come back to us in our company and they kind of say, you know, that thing that you said 5 years ago, and I have no memory because, but
They held on to it.
They held on to it, yeah, and I've held on to things as well that people do. You know, your ears are completely open at some points when you need it the most, and you'll find encouragement from somebody, even somebody's smile, you know, and lots of times that's enough, you know, that's enough just not to discourage, but to encourage, you know, yeah.
It's very exciting now for me because I get to travel a lot, meeting female directors finally. Before I couldn't, so that is also opens me. And I met mainly in Poland, mainly live action directors, very different, but incredible women. And I had. For the last couple months, I had so many incredible conversations, so many good advice, so many wonderful exchanging thoughts. So I think, so that's also what made this film through men open me up to meet, you know,
There's always room to grow and meet
Yeah.
interesting people and get new input. And, you know, I mean, we wouldn't have had this panel a while back. So it's a nice homage to what's going on. I'm just curious in terms of I know this is supposed to be a panel that celebrates, film, women directors that were recognized by the Motion Picture Academy in terms of an Oscar nomination for their films. Is there, did the Oscar nomination have any long-lasting effect or any effect on your lives given forward? Vicki, you were sort of a while back, but did being a part of the Shrek, phenomenon affect your career?
Yeah, it opened a lot of doors for sure. I just didn't know how to walk through them at the time. I was trying to transition into doing live action because I'm not an animator. When I started in this industry, it was a summer job. I was going to be a painter, and I just started working in animation to pay for school, and then it turned into this career, and I fell in love with it. So moving on to the next challenge of storytelling and of directing. I was suddenly offered a lot of, scripts piled up on the door in the old days when they would send real scripts. There'd be stacks, and so I didn't feel like anybody saw me as a risk until really very recently. When I would still get in those doors, and this time I knew what to do. I get in and I.
So that took a while.
Yeah,
to really figure out
really
how to.
Well, part of it is understanding how the industry works, and part of it's understanding that you can reshape it. So going in and taking those meetings and being prepared, doing the homework, knowing what it was I wanted to do with their movie, and they would be blown away. But I was a director in director jail, or they said our bosses are a little risk adverse. It was the first time I heard that word as applied to me. But that was very recently. But 20 years ago, yeah, it made a really big difference.
How about Dorota and Norris, but more recent? I know Dorota, you said you've gotten to travel a lot more and be exposed. Is that? Is the recognition?
Yeah, I'm as I said, I really enjoy that because of finally meeting people. Because as I said, I'm coming from the fine art background and from different background when. So I didn't get to meet so many people. I wasn't a part of, some kind of industry of animation.
Yeah, you're outside. Being in Poland, you're outside the industry.
I'm a complete outsider of the whole. So now I'm meeting them. I'm getting invited to be part of the jury, even of documentaries, and so that's great because I get to watch lots of stuff. But and meet lots of interesting people. And so thank you very much for also having me here today, because that's one part of this thing is just that you get to finally exchange experience and meet people, and I think that makes you a better person and better director in the future. But In terms of like changes to my life of the Oscars, I don't think so. I mean, no, didn't happen. The biggest thing for me was the audience, the viewership of this film. I think that changed me, not the nomination itself. Because
Did that more people see the film after the
we had
nomination?
that- no, not really, because at the nomination we were already at the end of the whole
Run.
distribution, and we had already almost 6 million people see this film, animation for grown-ups, which is like a niche. So, and I think that was completely blew our mind, and was something that we would never expect, you know. So, I think that was the main thing that changed stuff for me in my life was how this film was how
Perception?
yeah.
Interesting. Nor did it, I mean, you've been in the business a long time and been involved with other films, but was this a different experience for you?
Oh, it was relief because we had 2 other Oscar nominations. Made 2 films, got 2 Oscar nominations. Here was
But
the
for you
third.
personally, do you think?
So, it didn't make a difference.
I mean, but more spotlight, I think, on you. And
It did, yeah. And I don't know, you know, like I'm in animation, I'm in filmmaking because I find that I get to communicate something through that I can't otherwise do. What's interesting when you make a film when it gets a lot of attention then is that you're continually asked to speak about it and go, well, that's what the film was, you know, that the film should just express that and I don't need to speak about it, surely. So that's been interesting. I'm energized by making films. The other part of it is just it doesn't come very naturally to me. But it has been interesting. I loved at the Oscar ceremony that Frances McDormand asked all the female nominees to stand up. You know, that was
a pretty special
it was
moment.
incredible. It was
I was
absolutely.
smoking at that time.
I thought you meant like on fire with female somethingness. No.
Well, I mean, but I think to give you, the 3 of you, a lot of credit. I mean, the number of, you know, accomplished women directors are very few. You probably can count them on 2 hands. And I think, you know, there's a little added pressure for you guys to be the spokesmodels for achievement in directing. So I think that's kudos to you all for that. Is there just a? That's really they deserve. I think we're coming to the wind up here. But is there? I know there's some also some students in the audience or people, you know, other than that who maybe aspire to maybe direct their own projects. Is there any advice in particular, whether they're, you know, no matter what race or gender or whatever they are, to sort of, if you want to be a director and you're not sure what steps to take, is there any advice that maybe any of you could offer in terms of perseverance, et cetera?
Absolutely. I just think that I was waiting for it to feel right. And it's never going to feel right. It's always going to be extremely scary, and you're going to feel exposed. You feel like actually, you know, saying that I shouldn't be here and I'm an imposter and all the rest of it. So that's natural. That's completely natural. A couple of years ago, I was judging on a panel with young filmmakers. There was a male and a female co-directors came with the moderator. She asked them a question, and she went to go give the microphone to either one, and the young woman pointed to herself as in like, me, would you like me to answer the question? And the guy just went for the microphone and took it, and I'm going, oh wow, I just like her, you know. And so for me, I always think of that young woman, you know, and yeah, be more like the guy. Just grab it.
Grab the mic. Okay.
I would say don't be afraid to say you don't know something. You don't always have to have every answer right when it's asked. And that gives people a lot of room. And like I think that Nora, you said that too, that everyone breathes a sigh of relief that it's okay not to be perfect, and you know, I think some people bluster through it trying to look like they're always in command, you know, but it's okay sometimes not to have the answer. Eventually do.
Dorota, you have the last word.
Okay. Oh my God.
No pressure.
I think because I'm also in the jury of like the Polish Institute that gives the grants, and I get to read lots of projects of the young directors and the first-time directors. And what I would say is that sometimes think about the audience as well, because it's really good to And it's wonderful to express yourself artistically and do these beautiful things that, you know, are in your soul, but it's also, you also make films for the audience, and people will watch it. You know, that was what makes the film, what makes it sense. So, so I think it's a big part of the whole process is also thinking about the audience and what people who are going to watch it and why,
Right.
and what you really want to say. And it's enough to just pour your soul.
Very good, very good. Well, Vicki, Dorota, and Nora, thank you all so much for being here today. And thank you again to Women in Animation and all the great women that have been part of this, helping organize this great day of talk and conversation. Thank you.